Welcome back to Build a Mobile App in 2 Hours. In this session, we're going to update the onboarding experience. So to customize the onboarding experience, we're going to be changing the onboarding pattern, which is a Silk UI pattern. And to update it, we'll be changing the images and the text. So when we look at the onboarding pattern, it has items where there is an image and a text for each item in the carousel. So we'll be adding new images and changing the text. And we'd also like to make an adjustment where instead of having just 3 items in the carousel, we'd like to have a 4th. And that means that we may have to review the button appearing instead of on the 3rd item, where here we'd like to make sure it appears only on the 4th. So let's go ahead and get started. Before we customize the onboarding screen, let's take a look at how we got to that screen from the splash screen so that we can learn a little bit more about screens and actions. So the splash screen is inside of the common flow, which is part of the overall phone template. And here, if I open the splash screen, we can see what the splash screen looks like. And if I expand the triangle, we can see that the splash screen has an onload complete. If I double click on load complete, what that basically says is once the splash screen has finished loading, it's going to call the onboarding flow and call the redirector onboarding screen. So to see what's in that screen, I can double click on the destination and it now shows me the blank redirecting screen. The blank redirecting screen never really shows up, and that's because all screens have a set of lifecycle events. An onInitialize and onReady, both of which occur before we render the screen, and then when the screen is being transitioned, we can destroy it as well. So here there's an onInitialize. So if we open the redirector, the onInitialize action checks the onboarding status. The onboarding status is stored in local storage, and it's just keeping track of whether or not we've completed onboarding or not. If we've completed onboarding, it will take us to the pin redirector. If we haven't completed onboarding, it will take us to the onboarding screen. So double-clicking onboarding now takes us to the onboarding screen. And here we can see the set of pictures and text that make up the carousel. And we can actually see the carousel's arrows to the left and right. So we have 3 sets of pictures and text. And to see all the details, we have to actually scroll down to the point where we can see the button at the bottom. So although the carousel moves left and right, when it's defined inside of the screen, it's defined vertically. And if we begin looking at some of these, if we select the first image, we can see that it's using a local image and it has a onboarding local image. So we'd like to update that. And to be able to update that, let's close up the common flow. And here we can see that there's an images directory. And in the images folder, we can add new images to take care of the onboarding. So if I right-click, I can import an image, and in our resources folder, we have 1, 2, 3, 4 different onboarding images. So the first one is for the dashboard, and I'll load that. And then I'll load another image to go ahead and get the new trip. We'll do it a 3rd time to grab the select planets. And then we'll grab the last one, which will be the trip details. So now we have our 4 images that will allow us to update things. So if I select the first image, I can change it from onboarding to onboarding 1 for the dashboard, and we see it updates. If I update the second image, I can do the same and set it to the new trip. And if I update the 3rd, then I can select the select planets. And now I'm out of items inside of the carousel. So I'd like to add a fourth item, but it doesn't seem to have any easy way to do that here. And that's because sometimes when we're working inside of the canvas, we don't have access to everything that we'd like to be able to manipulate while we're getting a visual representation. So this is nice to be able to see what we're going to get, but it doesn't always help us work on everything. So if I come to the upper right, there's a less than and greater than symbol that says Show Widget Tree. And if I click on that, we can begin seeing the structure of our page. So I'm going to close the carousel item here, and what we see is that our screen has a layout, it has a background, and then it has the carousel that is holding the information, which are actually the pictures and the text. So there's a set of carousel items, and here we can see 3 of them. So I'm going to copy the last one, and to be able to create a fourth, all I have to do is go to the carousel items and paste it, and we can see it's been added to the bottom. So if I scroll a little further down, we now see that we have 2 sets of these. So I'm going to click on the third image that's at the bottom and ask it to become image 4 with the trip details. If I now scroll back up, we can see each of the images have been updated, which is great, but we should update the text as well. So when we click on the text, we could try to edit it in line, but sometimes that gets a little tricky. We can come over to the properties area and double click on the text, and it opens up a little text box. So I'm going to edit the text here, and in this case we'll say that summary info for each trip can be found on the dashboard. All right, we'll close that. We'll do the same thing for the second one, and in this case it's the new trip screen. So for this one we'll say that space trip name and dates will be specified on the new trip screen. And then we'll scroll down. For the third screen, we'll do the same. In this case, we'll say swiping the planets to the right will add them to the trip in the selected planets screen. In this case, it's not selected, will actually be the select planet screen. And at the bottom, we have to be careful where we click to get the text again. And in this case, we'll go ahead and say the list of planets selected will be displayed on the space trip details screen. All right, we'll close that up. So now we have the images updated and the text updated, which is great. Now we just need to check on the behavior of the button. So if we come over to the right and close the widget tree, we can move to the onboarding screen and expand the onboarding screen, where we can see the Get Started on click, which is the action that will happen when the button is clicked. But there's also a Validate Last Item that has an index. So let's double click Validate Last Item. Here we can see it's checking an index, and then it will make things visible or not. So in this case, it's looking at the number of items in our carousel, and because it's zero-based, it's saying if it's the third item, make it visible. And what it's making visible is the bottom wrapper. And the bottom wrapper is where the bottom the button at the bottom of the screen is located. In this case, we've added an extra item. So instead of index of 2 to be the third item, we want the button to appear on the fourth item. So we'll set it to index of 3, and then we'll go back to the screen editor. So that takes care of making sure the button shows up. What happens when the button is clicked? Here we can see if the button is clicked, it's going to retrieve the onboard status from local storage, and then it's going to set that status. And in this case, it's going to set onboarding to true, and then store it. And that will mean that the next time we come to onboarding, we wouldn't see it again because we've already completed it. And onboarding will drop us on the pin code redirector screen, which will take us to the pin code. So if we go back to the screen, we've updated the images and the text. The button behavior is good. So let's publish this to the server. And again, if we remember, it's pushing the description of what we've changed up to the server. It's generating and compiling all of the code. And then it will take that code and deploy it to both the database and the IIS server. And it'll be ready in just a second. So there we go. Let's click the Open in Browser button. And here in the emulator, we can see that our application has been updated. We can see that we now have 4 different dots for the different items that are in the carousel on the onboarding screen. And if we swipe to the left, we'll actually see the new trip. If we swipe again, we can see the Select Planet screen, and then we can see the description of the details screen. And as we move from the third to the fourth, the Get Started button shows up. So this is all behaving exactly the way we had hoped, which is great. So we've been doing the evaluation and testing here in the emulator. You can, now that you have OutSystems Now set up, you can do the testing inside the phone itself just by scanning the QR code and continuing to update and use the same app, just like we saw here in the emulator. So if we press Get Started, instead of going to the pin screen, it asks us to enter our user ID and password. So I'm going to enter my email, which is my user ID to get into Service Studio, and I will enter the password, and hopefully we can log in. And now we get to the pin screen. So let's actually register a pin. We'll select 1111, and then we have to confirm it. So we'll do 1111, and it takes us to the dashboard screen. So although the purple color with the template looks okay, we could have probably made the pin screen look a little better, and here with the city image in the background of the dashboard and the purple color, we could do something a little more spacey. So join me in the next section where we'll begin trying to update the look and feel of the app to make it a little more attractive.